Welcome, everybody. And I promised you we would start digging into these Obamacare numbers. We did. And you are not going to like what we found out. That 7.1 million enrollee figure the president was crowing about on Tuesday, try closer to 1 million. Not 1 million fewer enrollees, 1 million total enrollees, 1 million net new enrollees for the president's health care law. That's it. And by the way, we're being generous even with that, because we're not including the millions of Americans who have lost their health care coverage. Just factoring those numbers in, we're actually talking millions fewer with health care coverage now. But that's another story. For now, let's focus on how we arrived at the numbers that bring us to tonight's lead story, because I have the guy who did a whole bunch of this crunching. First, to what he essentially crunched. Of that 7.1 million who supposedly signed up for Obamacare, two-thirds, 2 out of 3 of them, already had insurance. They were just switching over. That leaves the remaining 1/3, or about 2.4 million Americans, as net new enrollees, newly insured on the government exchanges. But even that 2.4 million figure might itself be misleading, since early indications are that fewer than half of them have already paid their premiums. They've signed up for coverage, but they have not paid for that coverage. It's sort of like going on Amazon.com and putting items in your cart, but not yet signing out and purchasing the items in that cart. That knocks the number of newly insured down to 1.2 million. That is 1.2 million net new paying enrollees in the government health care program, not the 7.1 million figure that the administration is touting. We should emphasize here the White House says our figures don't account for the 4 million plus Americans who they say have signed up for Medicaid coverage thanks to Obamacare, and the more than 3 million younger Americans now getting coverage through their parents' plans, again, thanks to Obamacare. Unfortunately, that's kind of like comparing apples to oranges, and in the case of younger enrollees, it is still very difficult to separate out, which is why we also did not include, as I mentioned earlier, the some 6 million Americans who've lost their health care coverage outright as a result of the new law and its requirements. We just kept that out. We wanted to keep the numbers straight, the comparison simple, and the math logical, which brings us to the very logical Dr. David Hochberg. He works at the National Center for Public Policy, the folks who started crunching the numbers and found them in big variance with the president's 7.1 million number. You know, Doctor, it's amazing looking at it, how different it is. When you were coming and getting down to that final number, were you surprised it was so different?
Well, not really, because I'd been looking at this for a long time, and we know that roughly up to 20% of the people who have signed up have not paid their first premium, which reduces the total enrollment number on the exchanges probably down to 5.5 million. And then of the newly insured, about like you said, 1/3 people who were uninsured have signed up for.
By the way, how did you get to that number? Because the White House always said that tops, maybe 10, maybe 15%, certainly not upwards of 1/3. How did you discover it was much higher?
Well, basically, the RAND Corporation says that 1/3 of the people, in their latest survey, says about 1/3 of the people who have signed up for insurance on the exchange were previously uninsured, and that would be 2.4 million. But other research shows that those who have were newly insured, only half of those, as you mentioned, have paid their premium, so you get down to 1.2 million. And the other thing to keep in mind, the other thing to keep in mind here is that the Congressional Budget Office said that the exchanges would reduce the number of uninsured by 6 to 7 million. The Obama administration went along with those numbers, so with a number of only 1.2 million newly insured, in that sense, the goals have not been met, and the Obamacare exchanges are something of a failure.
Now, the mainstream media won't pick up on this, David. I mean, despite this, we tried to keep the math, and to your point, very clean comparison, apples to apples, did not get into all the millions of Americans who've lost insurance, or even addressed on the flip side the president arguing that many have moved on to Medicaid and whatever, so they really would count on that. We wanted to make sure the comparisons were clean. Now, the administration is going to argue, bottom line, that more people who were not insured are insured than were the case before. But we have 46 million Americans who technically do not have health insurance. If in the end we're talking now 1 million have picked it up, we still have 45 million who don't have it.
Yeah, and if you include, say, the Medicaid numbers, it might actually be, you might have actually reduced the number of uninsured even further. But you have to ask kind of here at what cost? I mean, that's a relatively small number of the uninsured who now have coverage, and this has been a very costly law, from the taxes to the people who lost insurance last year, to the people who have to pay much higher premiums on the exchange, to people who can't find coverage that covers their doctors, on into what we're looking forward to, the employer mandate, which is going to have a big impact on the job market. Right now, I think the costs of this law far outweigh the benefits.
But if you think, let's say you weren't concerned about nasty little details like costs, and you wanted to look at, was it worthwhile? If the whole idea of this was to insure everybody in this country, or most everybody, and in the end we'll still be left, the best case scenario I've seen, David, is that we're going to have around 30 to 35 million Americans who are not insured. Then that was kind of the figure that was bandied about as they were cooking up this bill. And in the end, that's what we're left with, that many uninsured. So if the idea was to insure everybody in the country, and we upended the system that was working for 90% of the folks in this country who had coverage, albeit with some, problems here and there. I'm not minimizing them. For the 10% who roughly did not, and now so many of that 10% are passing on this. What was this for?
I think this was probably more for the purposes of political control, of trying to get more middle-class people a new entitlement and lining up votes so that the party that supported this, the Democrats, would win future elections. I think that was the ultimate purpose of this. But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a very high price to pay for a very minimal reduction in insurance, or minimal reduction in the uninsured. And yeah, that 30 to 35 million number of people who will still remain uninsured is probably too low, given given how this first year has turned out.
David, thank you very, very much. Fascinating study. Again, I urge you folks to go to our website, see how we've crunched this all down for you. In a country of 318 million people, 46 million uninsured, maybe you knock it down to 45 million. The bottom line is that we're still having a lot of people uninsured, and a lot of people who are wondering why the heck we went through it.